Good morning. This is Bill from Curious Cars, and today from Autohaus of Naples, bringing you a 1968 Meyers Manx Dune Buggy. Although Dune Buggy probably isn't the right word for a Meyers, I should probably call it a sand car, which is what his original copyright was, which of course is going to be a story in and of itself. But it's just absolutely amazing piece, and I'm happy to have it. And I give a lot of thanks to the guys at Autohaus for letting me borrow it to do a video on. I haven't done a dune buggy before. It's a key part of American car culture, and I'm happy to have particularly an original Meyers Manx to check it off the list. So kudos to those guys. Thanks very much. And we'll just get on with it. First of all, the weather. I mean, it is just a nasty, misty, tepid fog of shit right now. It is horrible. We're in early August in Naples in southern Florida. I know it's hot everywhere, but I'm telling you, between the tropical sun and this 140% humidity, I don't think there's anywhere worse in the United States to be than in southern Florida right now. It's an absolute swamp, and it's just absolutely horrible. I just got back from vacation as well. I went up to the mountains. I found the highest place I could by searching Google, in the East Coast, searching North Carolina, that kind of thing. And the weather was fantastic. I was up in the mountains. There was nothing around me. It was peaceful. It was lovely. I had 50s at night, 70s during the day. Very few animals around, except for deer. I mean, they were everywhere up. Obviously, nobody's shooting these things, which is a shame. I mean, there's a lot of food running around on that mountain, but nobody's going after it. They looked carnivorous to me. I'm not sure, but they might have been, and I definitely didn't want to go down and check it out because, last thing in the world I want to do is get eaten by an animal. Apparently there's some bears there, but I didn't see any, which is good because, I would have seen them while clinging to the ceiling for my fingernails. I brought a load of guns with me, which would have come in handy, but otherwise I didn't. I'm out in the hot tub at night, and there's this big forest behind me, and God only knows what was watching me through the trees, thinking, oh my God, it's already, boiling, maybe a little bit of butter and a side dish, and this thing will be perfect. But as it turns out, I wasn't eaten. I had a lovely time. I was alone. I got to think and relax and rest. There were no idiots around me, the type, except maybe for the roads. And, the big 13-hour drive each way, I did see an incredible amount of just nitwits running up and down. And it makes me want to do maybe an entire video just on highway etiquette, which is obviously a lost art in America, and it's just an absolute shame. So maybe that's something we need to bring back. But anyway, we've got time constraints. There's a lot to cover here, so we're going to jump right into this car. And again, this one in particular is on loan from Autohaus. It's finished in the original brilliant red, a terrific color with enough metal flake to shame a bass boat. And it has been authenticated by the Manx Registry, built in April of '69, and one of the almost 6,000 that was built by that company. And this is just a fascinating story as we go on. It's named for the Manx cat, which is a very scary, sort of spry, long-legged, quick, stubby, rear-ended cat with little or no tail that is apparently very good at hunting down prey. So it's sort of a terrific name for this thing, which, in fact, they have a cat here on the front emblem with kind of a dinged-up sword. But there you see it, the Meyers Manx, brilliant, brilliant stuff. And it was dreamed up and produced by a remarkable guy named Bruce Meyers. And, he's not a guy that a lot of people know unless you look into him, but what an incredible cat, a Renaissance man, the definition of, who was born in 1926 to a father who had set up car dealerships for his friend Henry Ford. So obviously a well-to-do family, but they lost everything in the Depression, as a lot of people did back then. And he ended up growing up, in sort of cheap rental places, on the water in Southern California, and sort of developed a love for surfing and roaming the beaches and just being one of those, California cats who didn't care about much other than the next set of waves, and that's how he began. He did go to art school, sort of paved the way and gave him some impetus for what would come later. But he ended up joining the Navy, went off to fight in World War II. And became a war hero, rescuing his shipmates after a kamikaze attack he was serving on the USS Bunker Hill. It was a carrier, and it was kamikazed in 1945. It was a big mess, and they all went in the water. He gave his life jacket to a wounded guy, and ended up coming back after he survived and retrieving bodies with a team to make things right. And, again, pretty incredible guy. After the war, he was hired by a wealthy friend to set up a trading post in the South Pacific. So they sailed off to, I believe it was the Cook Islands, and they did that. They, constructed and built this trading post, ended up, doing what they were supposed to do. And then a few years later, he's returned. He stopped in Tahiti on the way to master the art of sailing native outriggers and playing ukulele for the local radio station. I just love the life this guy led. When he got back to Southern California, he went to work for a company called Jensen Marine that was run also by another genius guy. And he honed his skills with fiberglass, and the guy who owned it just drummed into his head simplicity of design. That was the way to make things great, and he really took it to heart. The large catamarans he designed were sleeker and faster than the competition, and the smaller ones were simple, lightweight, and fast. And this was not lost on one of his surfer buddies, a guy named Hobie Alter, who would sort of independently, without poor Bruce Meyers, parlayed that design into a very successful line of boats called Hobie Cats. And, this would just sort of become the theme of Meyers' life, is people sort of borrowing from him to make it great while he struggled on in the background. In fact, years later, he had we'll get into the car company, but while he was trying to save his little car company, Meyers was the first to design and build a pickup truck bedliner, something that obviously has done quite well for a lot of people. He made a fiberglass hot tub that was probably before its time, but now you find them everywhere. And in fact, there was one in that North Carolina cabin. And a kid's race car bed, which we all very well know. And the ideas were clearly fantastic, but very easily imitated beyond the purview of copyright laws. They were just simple. But people could make their own cheaper race car bed, and there's a bee attacking me. That's wonderful, and take money out of Meyers' pocket, and that's just the way it went for the poor guy, and that's what ultimately ended his company in 1971. But back in '63, supposedly he had sketched the design of what he called a sand car on a cocktail napkin while he was sitting there watching Jeeps and stripped-down cars struggle to get over the sand dunes so surfers could get closer to the waves, which was the whole point. And he believed he had a solution. Went to work on his own creation, and he built a fiberglass buggy that he called Old Red. It was a lightweight sand car. It used VW running gear that all sort of bolted to his own fiberglass chassis, and was apparently a bit of a pain in the ass to build. But it was incredible, and the way it went over the dunes was amazing, and his friends noticed that, and they're like, man, we want one. So he started building ones for his friends, and that sort of parlayed into a business. Well, very quickly on, he realized that instead of using his fiberglass shell as the main chassis, it was much better to bolt it onto an existing Volkswagen chassis for a variety of reasons. And once he started doing that, more orders started coming in, more people wanted them, and it all worked out very well. And the design was absolutely perfect. You look at it and you think, wow, it's just such an obvious, iconic pop culture thing. Where did it come from? Well, I mean, his inspiration, according to Meyers, was sort of the cartoon cars that were being driven by like Daffy Duck and Mickey Mouse when he was a kid. These big, outlandish things with huge tires and swoopy curves. And he took that inspiration and turned it into the Meyers Manx. And by putting it on the fiberglass shell onto a Beetle, it was perfect. I mean, you got all this sort of high-quality German running gear and mechanicals. You know, the 60s Beetles were being very, very well made. The rear engine layout gave it great traction off-road. The torsion bar suspension made it really easy to lift, raise, lower, do whatever you wanted to do without too much trouble. And the whole thing just came together in this beautiful, proper, easy way that was, you know, just instantly lovely for the rest of the world. I'm telling you, I'm just absolutely rambling on at this point, but I'll keep going. The company grew slowly, and then in '67, it defeated motorcycles, trucks, other cars to win the inaugural Mexican 1000. I mean, again, Meyers built the thing just to be able to take his surfboard to the, you know, waves in Baja California. And before you knew it, this thing that he built to do it won this inaugural Mexican 1000 race, what would go on to be the Baja 1000. And that was it. After, I mean, it ended up on the covers of Car and Driver, Road and Track, Hot Rod, Carcraft, Popular Mechanics did a story on it. And the orders just absolutely poured in. And Meyers did what he could to keep up with demand, but he was way more of a perfectionist than a businessman. He ended up losing money on every one he built. It took him a while to realize that. He wanted to build the whole car and sell it as a car, not as a kit. But Volkswagen was very parsimonious with their chassis, and they would not sell him, you know, raw chassis. He would have had to buy a whole Beetle or assemble a Beetle from parts, which just became too much labor, too expensive to do. So there was no way for him to make a new Manx other than a kit. So while he was working on that, competitors jumped in. I mean, it said like the first few orders of these things were from other competitors who were going to copy the mold, and that's kind of exactly what happened. So, you know, while Meyers made about 6,000 of these things, copycat companies ultimately, they estimate about 350,000, you know, copies of the Manx were made over the years, with just a tiny, tiny portion being the original. And, you know, Meyers sued the largest of the companies for copyright infringement because he was, again, really struggling in the water. But the judge ruled for the copiers, and the poor guy went out of business in '71. The IRS liquidated it, and he went off just bitter and miserable and very, very unhappy. He had tried making other cars. He, you know, made a harder to copy Manx Mark II, something that they couldn't quite come up with, and a much harder to copy Manx SV. And in keeping with the story of this guy, that thing in the late '60s had Lambo doors before there was a Lambo with doors like that. So you can kind of credit that one to him as well. You know, the SV had these scissoring I do like that word, scissoring. Lamborghini doors even before the Countach was finished. So pretty impressive cat, but it didn't really sell well because it lacked the one specific thing that made this Manx, the original Manx, so perfect, and that was its simplicity. And while the simplicity was what made it so great, the simplicity was what made it also really easy to copy, you know, outside the purview of copyright laws. So it was a win and a lose for the guy. Very, very shame. There was also a car he called the Toad, TOW''D, that was more of a race. It was not street legal, and it had a front setup that was meant to be hooked up to another car and towed to where you'd go race it. There was also a couple of just sort of resort transports called the, one was the Tourista and the other was the Resorter. And, you know, I think he made about 7,000 cars in all, which at the time actually made him the 7th largest automobile maker in the United States. So, The guy just had a really fascinating career, but he was bitter and resentful. He collapsed in 71, left car building altogether, went back to other odd jobs, did the things that he was going to do. In 94, he ended up going over to Europe to some kind of dune buggy VW type meeting, and just felt inspired by, even though I think there were 100 dune buggies there at that big meet at Le Mans where he went to visit, most of them were copies, but he realized, and his friends told him, look, you inspired all of this, you made all of this, and it sort of changed his head and made him realize that, he could dump the bitterness and start doing something else. So in 1999, him and his sixth wife, I definitely liked getting married a lot, ended up reopening the Manx car company, selling Manx kits to the public. In fact, there's an EV Manx. There's all kinds. They're still going today. He sold out a few years after that, but the company continues, and it's selling the same kit, sort of designed and engineered by this pretty remarkable guy. You just have to absolutely hand it to him. And one of the great names in automotive history that probably doesn't get the credit that he deserves for it for a variety of reasons. So anyway, look, I'm going to take a break there. I'm going to collect my thoughts. The coronavirus whiskey is obviously a bit much for me today. And we come back and we're going to keep going on this thing. So bear with me one moment. All right, so let's dive into this. Well, real quick, I'll tell you, I'm going to the Keys next week. It's a second vacation in short order, although it's a little bit shorter. We're doing that lobster season where, somebody my age on whiskey and cigarettes dives down 10 feet, which is a lot, without a tank to go get a lobster out of a hole with a stick and a net. So there's a strong chance this is going to kill me at this point and I won't be back. But either way, it's fine. If it works out that way, I'll die doing what I loved. Although I think that's one of the stupidest things I've ever heard in my life. The whole he died doing what he loved thing. The guy who was wreck diving did not like getting his foot stuck in the wreck and drowning to death after his air ran out. The farmer in the field, he may have loved farming, but he hated it when the tractor rolled over on him. So don't give me that whole died doing what he loved crap. Anyway, look, we're going to dive right back into this thing. The exterior is wild and perfect, and you've got these sort of insane colors that were built into the gel coat. Again, enough metal flake in it to shame a bass boat. I like that. A bass boat. I mean, just absolutely nuts, and you can see his shipbuilding expertise in it. I mean, the guy, Meyers, could work with fiberglass like nobody else. He had an absolute gift for it. I love the headlight stalks. I think they're absolutely incredible. The way they look on that thing is just cool as shit. The pop-up windshield, the hard top, the raked windshield, the swoopy curves, the fenders that were designed to be able to rest a beer on them on the front. That was one of the design features of the car. No doors, made it much more rigid, compound curves. The fiberglass shell was absolutely brilliant, and it's what made the Manx one of the great off-road and on-road racers of its time. It had these structural support tubes. You can kind of see them there up at the top that ran all the way to the front fenders as well, and just made this thing incredibly rigid, stiffer even than the original VW body that would have sat on it. Very, very clever stuff in terms of both cosmetic and mechanical styling. The guy just had an absolute knack for it. You had the stubby little front, again, no unnecessary vents or swoops on the hood. Simplicity was the key to the whole thing. He only had stuff where it needed it, and that's what made it work. You had this open engine bay in the back, which was obviously great for cooling, although not great for theft. It was probably pretty easy for some cats to steal the engines out of these things. You see the way that the engine cradle has been extended on that. You could fit a 12-cylinder in this thing if you wanted to. And mechanically, they did put a lot of different engines in them. But because these were kits sold to the public, all of the Manxes they varied wildly. I mean, everybody had their own concept of what they should be like. Wheel and tire choice, color choice, engine choice, seats, that sort of thing. And the kits were cheap enough, and then you could do all the other stuff on top of it to sort of make it your own thing. But mechanically, it was brilliant. It weighed about a third of what the Beetle did. They shortened the toughest part of building a Manx was shortening the Beetle chassis. It had to be cut, remove about 14 inches of it, and re-weld it. Other than that, everything just bolted on, simple, quick, and easy. And that was another part of the joy of this thing, was this that your average cat, I mean, I get today's kids are more likely to paint their nails than build a dune buggy, but back then, building this thing was not outside the purview of, even the kind of below average mechanically inclined guy. It just wasn't that hard to do. It all went together fairly easy. And the shortened chassis could handle beyond the limits of almost any driver on or off road, and you could turn it with just go-kart precision and over a G. Car and Driver did I'll link to that in the video, but they were amazed at the way this thing performed, above and beyond any other car they had ever tested in terms of braking and handling. It was just absolutely astounding. But of course, it used the very age-old, tried-and-true formula of, add lightness. I mean, the thing was just very, very light, and that's what made it handle so well. They instantly started dominating off-road racing and even competitive autocross events. I mean, this thing could outhandle a Lotus Super 7 or a Cobra. It was just absolutely incredible. And it even won its class at the 66 Pikes Peak Hill Climb. They brought a prepped racing Manx to do it. The thing blew up or had some mechanical problems, so they ran the stock VW factory Manx type thing that towed it there, and that ended up winning its class even over a 427 Cobra set up for hill climbing and a bunch of other cars that were set up for it. So the car just gave, in fact, a 4x4 club ended up banning them because they were too good. The Pikes Peak, they did away with the class it was in because it just dominated the competition. It was just an amazing car, the way it came together and could handle and run, and it was the perfect car for doing what it was designed to do, and was even pretty damn good at doing shit that it wasn't designed to do. In 2014, the Manx was the second significant car, motorcycle, or truck after the '64 Shelby Cobra Daytona Coupe to be inducted to the National Historic Vehicle Register, which is quite an honor. It is a project sort of detailing the cultural significance of cars and, American vehicles. And in a nod to their ingenuity and his business troubles, the Register said the Meyers Manx was the inspiration for over 250,000 similar cars manufactured by other companies, and is thus the most replicated car in history. Again, the poor guy, Bruce, it was just the story of his life. He came up with these great ideas, he pursued them, he built them, and then other people took those ideas, ran with them, and did much, much better with them than he did. So, a real terrible shame. But again, let's get into this real quick. The front bumper pushed out, very, very cool, stubby little front end, hood with no issues at all other than the gas cap. You can see he gives you a couple little spots if you want to put wipers in it, which very few people do. There's a little indentation here for your Meyers Manx badge. There are very easy ways to tell if your dune buggy is a copy or a real Meyers Manx, and once you determine it's a Manx, you can get it authenticated like this one, and it does help the value go up. The wheels and tires are as unique as every, Meyers himself had one with Formula One tires off a Honda race team that he used. This one's using Krager SS's and Cooper Cobras. You could use, again, you could raise the car, you could lower the car, you could make it hand on road, you could make it hand off road. This one has side pods, which are kind of cool. They nicely do finish the side of the vehicle. A lot of Manxes just have this sort of unfinished fiberglass bathtub type stuff under the top body line. With the side pods, I do think it makes it kind of a more complete thing, but of course it does add weight to it. You got VW brakes, you got VW suspension, you got a VW engine, different power plants you could put in it. A lot of guys use Porsche power plants, Corvair power plants, and these things ended up in pop culture. I mean, all of a sudden it just became an absolute craze. You had Steve McQueen drove one in the Thomas Crown affair. That one actually ended up selling for $450,000 in 2020, so it was that highly thought of and was a pretty amazing car, and really fit. Steve McQueen himself was an enthusiast of these and ended up driving them. You also had Elvis driving one, and Live a Little, Love a Little. That's a guy that sort of could sell a product for you. And I imagine when he was doing his beach buggy stuff in a Meyers Manx, he inspired a lot of kids to go out and buy a kit. And even James Bond, Roger Moore, and his lady friend were attacked by a bunch of dune buggy driving nut jobs, and I want to say it was For Your Eyes Only in the early 70s, although those were Manx copies and not an actual Manx, so it was out there. And then, of course, in my world, you had Speed Buggy, which was sort of an early 70s Hanna-Barbera cartoon where a group of goofballs, globe-trotting off-road racers, went around solving mysteries, and the car itself was a talking Manx Dune Buggy that was piloted by a Shaggy clone, like Shaggy from Scooby. The guy was exactly the same, but he had a southern drawl and kind of acted semi-retarded. And it makes me wish that this one had a CB antenna with a big flag on it, because that would just complete the package. But anyway, very, very cool to look at. And it's just, again, the perfect design. I mean, this guy had such an eye and such a skill for it. But anyway, look, I'm going to pause it there before I ramble on. We're going to hop in this thing. I'm going to act like Mary Lou Retton to get in and out of it, and then we're going to go for a spin. So bear with me one moment. All right, I've got my crap in the back. Let's hop in this thing and go for a spin. I am so glad the camera's not on me, illustrating just how friggin' inelegant I am getting in and out of this thing. Up here you see the Volkswagen, the original Volkswagen VIN plate on the dash. That's from that 68 Beetle that they put this Manx body on, and of course that's why it's titled as a 68. Once I'm inside, I'll show you the plaque from the Manx company, but anyway, let's do that. Oh God. Oh God. Oh, okay. All right. And I fell in. I'm not gonna have a video of me getting out, because that's even worse. Here you can see behind the wheel, it's just awesome. You've got those stock headlights looking like, a crab on the beach or something. The tree, you get, again, that's what made these things so simple and easy. You could use your VW headlights in a shell that you could buy to use as the stalks. It uses the VW turn signals up there on the fenders. You could use the VW mirrors. You could build these things as cheap or as expensive as you wanted, and that's why so many of these cars varied, based on who was building it and what their budget was. This earlier Manx had the dash shell was separate from the hood. Later on in the Mark II, it became a one-piece design. There's the original VDO Volkswagen speedometer and a couple of gauges, and your headlights, your e-brake, your ignition. I think it would have been cool to have kind of an old wood wheel in this thing, but whoever owned it updated it to sort of this modern racy wheel with a VW center on it. The horn is not here, it's over here, and obviously needs ignition. And this thing has the same turn signals that basically you could put on a golf cart to make it street legal. There you see the VW tranny The VW transmission tunnel, the pedals on the floor, traditional perfect VW style, and the way that the Manx body shell sort of bolts down to it on those original Volkswagen pans and shifter. You know, e-brakes were a thing with go-karts. Some of the earlier Manx, they had dual side e-brakes for turning. You could hit the left, hit the right. This one has a pneumatic looking e-brake that is set up for, you know, sort of aerobatic driving. And back here, and turning around is a pain, there you can see those original Manx plates, or at least the one on the bottom, which indicates the color, the year, the number it was produced. And it was, if I remember in my brain right, April of '69 this kit was made. And then the plaque above it was a recent one when this particular unit was authenticated. You can see the batteries under the rear seat. On the other side there was a spare tire holder, which nobody used because the thing's so light. You could run on a flat tire to the nearest gas station without any problems. And if it was on the back, you just put that wheel on the front. So very, very crafty stuff. What do we got? Oh, there's the high beams. I was missing those this morning. It was dark out, so I didn't quite see them. Anyway, let's fire this thing up and see what we got. Just great old-fashioned air-cooled VW sound. Love it. You can tell it's a modern, well-built VW engine. Just fires right to life when you breathe on it and runs like a top. Standard VW 4-speed manual transmission. Seat belts. Lap only. I'm not going to bother. Let me pull up. I've got to get out and close Peter's gate. It took a shit again, so it's not working. And I've got to go out and close it manually. So let me park for a second, get in and out of this friggin' thing, and then we're going to go for a spin. So hold on one moment. All right, gate closed. Let's do this. Absolutely love it. And you know, again, you got that great old VW sound, but the thing's actually quick because it weighs like, you know, 1,500 pounds. It weighs less than a Miata. So you really don't need much horsepower to get throttle response and get the thing moving down the road. Steering is, excuse me, like something from a go-kart. I mean, it's just instant precision. Goes exactly where you point it. The shortened chassis makes it even more like a go-kart. And even though it was designed to go off-road, you can see why the on-road stuff was so absolutely perfect. Because, and man, the way people smile and wave at this thing, you know, I'm not a big fan of being on display and having people look at me while I'm driving. I want to wear like a trench coat and sunglasses. But I do enjoy driving it so much, I don't really care. And that says something. Let's get out into traffic and see what we got. I would not say it's going to be an interstate car for obvious reasons. It'll do it. These things will go over 100 actually. But no thanks. Does that over a certain numbers. I'm holding that down with my hands for the moment. But anyway, there it is. What an incredibly fun thing to drive around. I mean, if you're looking to have a second collectible car, even whatever you want to call it, you know, that goes up in value, that's fun to drive, that's easy to maintain, that makes you smile and giggle when you drive it, you really can't do much better than a Manx Dune Buggy. It's just an absolute joy and a lot of fun to drive around. So look, if you have an interest in this one, give the guys at Autohaus a call. Again, it's a true authenticated Manx. It's had a frame-off restoration, runs and drives fantastic. is a lot of fun to tool around, and you won't be sorry you did. Those guys could be reached at 239-263-8500 on the web at autohausnaples.com. Again, going to the Keys next week. I'm going to try and get a video out. They actually have a cool old Land Cruiser at Autohaus I'd like to do, but no promises. I don't know if I'm going to get it in time. If not, I'll get something when I come back, and we'll definitely try to get the ball rolling. And otherwise, we'll try to get a lot more videos out when the weather improves and, you know, season hits Naples and everyone comes back. So, look, thank you very much for having a look. Appreciate it. And I'll leave you here with a few quick shifts as we go for a drive, but we will see you with the next one. Take care.